With everyone fighting for attention, how can your business stand out and connect with customers? Easy, with Constant Contact. Constant Contact's award-winning marketplace platform has helped millions of small businesses stand out, stay top of mind, and see big results fast. It's okay if you don't know much about marketing. Constant Contact's writing assistant tools and automation features help you craft messaging and say the right things at the right time. I used this to help write and send my email newsletters, and you should too. So get going and start growing your business today with a free trial at ConstantContact.com. Just go to ConstantContact.com right now. Constant Contact, helping the small stand tall. ConstantContact.com.
I can't believe they won that football game. I still can't believe they won the football game, watching it back 20 years later. And the way that it ended with Steve Smith, the walk-off, it was just perfect for that team. Like, that whole season.
It's January 2004, Panthers at Rams. This is Remember That Game, the podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my returning guest is Steven Ruiz of The Ringer. You can check out the last episode we did on the comeback in Buffalo, led against the Oilers by Frank Reich, the original Carolina Panther. But I know from chatting with you in Indy back in February, the Panthers quarterback that captured your imagination in the mid-aughts was Jake Delhomme. Are you ready to go on this roller coaster once again, Steven?
I can't wait for this because I'm so used to talking about the Panthers in negative terms over the last couple of years. Like, there's really no other way to talk about this franchise, that it's going to be fun to actually, talk about them in positive terms for once.
Dan Morgan, new Panthers general manager in 2024. Back 21 years prior, leading a rising young Panthers defense at middle linebacker under John Fox, defensive line of 2024 Hall of Famer Julius Peppers, along with Brenton Buckner, Mike Rucker, and Chris Jenkins, the strength of that unit. What's your Panthers origin story?
This is not going to be a satisfying answer. It was probably the jersey colors, the uniform colors. I mean, I was a small child picking a team. They were new. The Panthers were founded in 1994-5. It was between them and the Jaguars, two similarly colored teams. Like, you have the teal on one end and the light blue on the other end. My brother ended up a Jaguars fan. I ended up a Panthers fan, and that's kind of how it worked. And I had Sunday ticket growing up, so I was able to watch the games for the most part. And the seasons I didn't have it, I'd follow along on the CBS Sports Line game tracker to kind of see what was going on. I relied on that a fair amount during the season. One of my vivid memories from this season specifically was them playing the Colts. And I want to say that it was week 5, week 6. The Panthers were undefeated. They were off to a surprise start. The Colts were they had Peyton Manning. They were a playoff team every year. So that felt like the first real test to me for this season. And the Panthers won that game in overtime. I watched the whole thing on the game tracker on CBSSports.com. But that's one of my first football memories.
Pre-ubiquity of being able to stream all the games, I bet it was pretty wild looking at the ticker, seeing the Panthers are down, and then eventually throw to New York for a highlight in the fourth quarter where Jake Delhomme's leading one of his record-setting 7 regular season fourth quarter / overtime game-winning drives. That had to be pretty wild there in the 2003 season.
Yeah, and the one game I do remember watching live because it was on national television was, I think it was week 2. I'm remembering the dates wrong. I'm trying to do this without actually going back and looking at it and cheating. But I think they played the Bucks, the defending champion Bucks, and they won that game 12-9. They had a block of an extra point to even win it because Keenan McCardell caught a touchdown with seconds remaining. They were down by 6. So that was a wild game. I still remember that one. But this season really shaped me as a football fan. I would say this is my first time watching a team that I cheered for go on a great run. Like the Panthers in 1996, I vaguely remember them going to the NFC Championship, but I can't tell you anything about that team. This team, I can tell you everything about them.
At what point are you in on Delhomme? In 98, he's a backup to Kurt Warner, who would also be at the stadium this game on the Rams sideline. 98, a backup to Kurt Warner in Amsterdam for the Amsterdam Admirals. 99, he wins NFL Europe with the Frankfurt Galaxy, and then on the Saints and makes his way to Carolina in 03. When's the beginning of your foray into Delhomme truthering?
Honestly, it was pre-Carolina because he got some run with the Saints before then. He played as a backup a couple times, and I remember knowing of him. Like I wasn't hyped about him or anything. I didn't have any like quarterback takes like I have now. I wasn't like, oh, his arm strength, his accuracy, what's his ceiling. I wasn't talking about quarterbacks like that back then. But I do remember seeing him play for the Saints and be like, that guy's fun, and he's got a funny name. And then he was on the Panthers, and I was excited about it. And I still remember that first game because they played the Jaguars. And like, so my brother and my household, we got a rivalry going and the Jaguars get out to a 17-0 lead. If I recall correctly, it might've been 14, might've been 21. They get up to a big lead. Rodney Peete had a good season the year before that. I think they ended up going 8-8, but they were like 8-3 or 7-3 when he was the starting quarterback. So I was kind of excited about Rodney Peete the next year. I was like, let's see what Rodney Peete can do. Again, I had no conception of like a ceiling on a quarterback. Was Rodney Peete like a 34-year-old journeyman quarterback who was never going to lead them to anything? Probably, but I didn't know that at the time. And then, they make the switch. I think it was halftime, and he comes in and leads the 17-point comeback. I think Ricky Proehl has the game-winning catch, if I recall correctly, and I was hooked from there. That was enough because they started the season off winning like their first 5 games, so there was really no reason for me to question him. And then I watched this game yesterday, and I could see why I was into him. He's like, I'm into him right now. 2024 me is still into him. Like the throws he was making, there were some impressive throws against the Rams, like some movement stuff that I really thought was interesting, and I could see how he developed into eventually becoming a Pro Bowl quarterback. Like I think that he's one of the more underrated players in the history of the franchise, especially with Cam Newton kind of stealing his thunder. But he was our first quarterback that like you could really fall in love with for multiple years. Like Steve Berline had a year in 1999 when he threw for a bunch of touchdowns, where I think people probably got on board with him. But even him, I think he was gone the year after that. This was the first time we actually had. He wasn't a franchise quarterback, but you could squint your eyes and pretend that he was one. He made a couple Pro Bowls. And he was one thing about him that I think is very much forgotten is that dude just balled out in the playoffs. Like we remember his final game against the Cardinals, which was a disaster. But before then, like statistically, he was one of the best postseason quarterbacks ever. And like me now, I understand that like, playoff sample sizes are really small. And it's like Eli Manning and Joe Flacco are the guys we think of when we think of like elite quarterbacks in the playoffs. But like that dude turned it on, and he had me believing that when it became playoff time, Jake was going to deliver. And for the most part, it worked until that Cardinals game in 2008.
Delhomme and Bulger on kind of parallel career trajectories.
Yeah.
Both journeyman afterthoughts take over potent offenses, have a good stretch of play, eventually get big extensions just as they fall off the cliff. But both coming into 2003 with hype and not a ton of experience. Bulger goes into this game in 2003, 18-4 as Rams starter. Played a bit down the stretch in 2002, took over for Kurt Warner in week 1 of 2003. Warner's hand was pretty dinged up at that point in his career. But Bulger second in passing in the league, but also league high 22 interceptions, would go on to oddly Pro Bowl MVP this season here. We were feeling competitive about him and your quarterback Delhomme.
I definitely didn't at the time. But watching this game, if I had my mentality watching that game back then, I definitely would have been competitive about it. Because I was watching, I was like, Jake Delhomme's the better quarterback here. I know Bulger has the numbers. I know the Rams are like the high-flying offense this year. I think they led the league in scoring. But to me, Delhomme was doing more. Like watching, he's moving more. He's making more impressive throws. Marc Bulger was just calling height, dropping back, and throwing it over the middle of the field to like Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt running a dig route over and over and over again, even in this game. It was a little Purdy-ish. It reminded me a little Purdy. There are a couple of those like anticipation balls that Purdy gets celebrated for. Bulger was throwing them too.
Could you imagine what ranking Marc Bulger in the public sphere would have been like in 2003?
Oh man, I'm sure it would have been a disaster. I'm sure it would have been like trying to rank Purdy, honestly. And what's funny is like there was a competitive edge to this game for me. I just said like my brother was a Jaguars fan. My dad grew up in Los Angeles. My dad is a Rams fan and has been a Rams fan his whole life. So this was another one. It was very in the family. There was a lot of people in my family with a lot of different allegiances. So this game was very personal to me. And I remember being I was scared of this match. I was scared shitless of this matchup. I don't know if I can cuss, but I was terrified of this matchup because the Rams this year just seemed so good, and the Panthers, like even back then, I was realistic. I was like, yes, this team is overachieving, but people don't remember they went through a slow phase at the end of the season where they lost 3 games in a row. I remember there was a game where they played Michael Vick, and this was the year I think Michael Vick broke his leg and then came back later in the year. And his return game was against the Panthers. The Panthers, I think, had lost 2 in a row or something like that. They were kind of teetering. They were the team that nobody expected to win, and it was like, oh, it's midnight for Cinderella. And they lose that game to Michael Vick, and I just remember being like, man. I mean, they might make the playoffs, but they're not going to win anything. But this was the game where you could really start to believe, because this was a good Rams team. I think if the Rams win this game, they win the Super Bowl without a doubt in my mind.
Yeah, it's still the greatest show on turf. The mad scientist of it all, Mike Martz, is still there. Still got Marshall Faulk, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, another injured but still balling out playoff performance.
Yeah.
And Panthers were hanging on through first couple drives where Delhomme did struggle, didn't read the fire zone.
Yeah.
Tommy Pauly picks off the slant. And the Rams between the sticks, looking like I saw you mentioned on Twitter, the 2023 McDaniel offense, hitting that deep post and dig here and there. It's looking good, but gets to the red zone and Martz goes mad scientist, but in a bad way. Marc Bulger with the QB keeper off tackle doesn't work.
Yeah.
They kick a field goal. And then on the next drive, just pressured, inaccurate throw to an open receiver by Bulger. So it leaves the Panthers only down 6-0. I imagine you're happy to taking a couple swings and still be in it, down a score.
Yeah, I remember at the time just being really nervous, and I think early on in the game, it felt like it was teetering on the edge of a blowout. Like I think like it did that first quarter did nothing to kind of like calm my nerves. I do remember, just because like Steven Davis eventually goes down. Once Steven Davis goes down, it really seems dire for the Panthers, because he was such a big deal for them in this season. Like he was their big free agency signing. He was the star of the show. It was like, oh, we're coming off this season where we ended promising. Like John Fox's defense really stepped up over the last half of the season. Julius Peppers coming off his rookie year, which got cut short, actually got suspended for 4 games. He's going to take the step. The defensive line was already getting hyped. Like Chris Jenkins was a big deal, and he was from Maryland, so I already knew about him. Steven Davis felt like the missing piece, and when he went out early in this game, it was like, oh no, like what are they going to do now? So I was feeling it was 6-0, and it was like they were playing the type of game that John Fox wanted to play. There was like a little graphic on the screen that they kept showing where John Fox's goal for the game was to keep it to 8 possessions, 2 possessions per quarter, just to shorten the game. And though they were doing that, they were like wasting the clock and stuff, and they weren't giving up 7. It just felt like the Rams could move the ball in between the 20s however they wanted, and it felt like the Panthers really had no recourse for doing that. I remember there was like a reverse to Muhsin Muhammad, and if you know, like Muhsin Muhammad was not the type of receiver you give a reverse to. When I saw that, I was like, oh man, Dan Henning, the offensive coordinator, I was like, this guy's desperate for anything. But it did set up a nice little like reverse pass to Steve Smith. Steve Smith throws a dime on the run on a frozen rope, hits Muhammad in the hands, a covered Muhammad like 20 yards downfield, and he drops it. So I guess the setup did work for Dan Henning. But I was nervous. After the beginning.
One thing that eventually started to work against what the announcing team was calling not a finesse defense. They were stressing this was an attacking fast defense. So for the Panthers, creating cutback lanes for their running backs, starting with Steven Davis on a counter trap, 64 yards, and the Panthers are in business.
Yeah, that was the concept. It wasn't always a counter trap, but that was a concept they seemed to go back to a lot, was kind of having a blocker, whether it was a fullback or guard, come back the other way, and the running back would follow him. You don't really see run concepts like that anymore. Obviously you're not seeing a lot of 2-back stuff, so it's harder to do that. But the Panthers run game did stand out to me as a big advantage for them. Obviously I think they ran for 200 yards in this game, but it really stood out against Lovie Smith, who's the defensive coordinator. I think this was his first year as defensive coordinator for the Rams. It stood out that he he was playing that soft zone defense. He was playing that, that Tampa 2. They would rotate down sometimes. Like you said, they got Delhomme with the fire zone on I think it was the first drive, where he throws a pick on a slant. But that was the matchup right there, was that too high zone defense, kind of like the type of defense you see now going up against a under center diverse run game. It really felt like a Lions team in 2023 against, I don't know, like a Brandon Staley defense. That's the kind of matchup we saw on that side of the ball in this one.
That 64-yard run by Steven Davis gives them a chance in the red zone and maybe take the lead here. But he injures a quad on that play, and in comes Deshaun Foster. What do you think about his running style, how it plays then versus now, along with Steven Davis? And what do you see from Deshaun Foster in relief here?
Oh, I love Deshaun Foster. Like, as a rookie, he had a run against Washington in the preseason where I was like, oh, yeah, this guy's going to be so good. He went to UCLA. I remember, playing the old NCAA games that he was the UCLA running back. But this was, his breakout game. For me, this is, the proof of concept game. I knew this guy was going to be good. And then the next week, I know we're not going to talk about the Eagles game the next week, one of the best touchdown runs, in terms of effort on the goal line that I have ever seen. He broke, 3 tackles. I think one of them might have been Brian Dawkins. But I think in today's NFL, it's going to be hard to run the ball with a Steven Davis, who he's got the body type of a bruiser. He's going to run over you. But I really think he was good at reading blocks and finding openings. And you could see that in this game. And just taking advantage of what was there. He didn't leave meat on the bone. He was that type of running back, which I think works for a team that isn't built around the run game necessarily. In today's game, obviously back then it worked well for Carolina. But I think he would be great on a team like the Chiefs. The reason why Isaiah Pacheco is so good for the Chiefs is because he's going to get those 4 yards no matter what. He's going to fall forward and get 4 yards. And I think Steven Davis is that type of running back where even if you put him in a spread, he's going to continue to dent the defense and just keep putting dents in the defense. And eventually he's going to break one, but he's going to keep you on schedule and ahead of the chains. Whereas I think Deshaun Foster would be more valued, and I think he would be a better playmaker in today's game. I don't know if he would be as conducive to a spread style of offense, but I think if you put him in the Eagles offense and you give him big holes to work with, I think he would really he was a great runner, great cut moves, lateral quickness. He could break tackles. He was a good player. And he made people miss in the open field. He also had one of the coolest touchdowns in the Super Bowl when he dove into the end zone. I just remember that image of him diving sideways parallel to the ground. So a fun player in Panthers history.
Yeah, as you mentioned, killing them with the cutback, Archuleta or Jason Sehorn or Tommy Polley, just losing their angles. And there was a play, a 3rd and 14, that he converts on a run, just patience and cut, patience and cut. I saw a little Lev Bell there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the Lev Bell. I like the patience. He waited for his hole and then he bursted through it. That's what it was. And it was really fun to watch him play. Honestly, he didn't get enough carries that season. Obviously, you have Steven Davis. He's a bell cow back. But I do wonder if Steven Davis would have lasted a little bit longer. Obviously, Steven Davis was good in Washington, so he had a good career before this. But I wonder if he lasted a little longer in Carolina if they had just used Deshaun Foster a little more. I think he was a 2nd-round pick that year. He had the draft capital behind him. It would have made sense to play him more. I get that you just gave Steven Davis a big contract to play for you, but I do think if they would have done a Thunder and Lightning thing a little bit more, it would have, preserved Steven Davis. Because Steven Davis, I think the next year it was, he ran for a lot of touchdowns, but he didn't get a lot of running yardage. So fantasy-wise, he was still very valuable the next year. But after that, as a player, it was kind of the beginning of the end for him.
Yeah, Steven Davis, crazy workload and great performance from the late 90s into the early 2000s, but now he's out. Deshaun Foster's in on the goal line. They try a fake handoff to the upback Nick Goings and pitch to Foster, but Leonard Little all over it, the Rams defensive end, creates a situation where the lateral movement batted forward somehow, so it's a fumble into the end zone. Muhsin Muhammad recovers. I imagine Panthers are 10.5 point live line. I imagine Panthers are 10.5 point dogs on the live spread at that point after going into the game. 7-point dogs. But 7-6, Panthers up now. Are we back?
Oh, yeah, we felt back. I felt back after that. I was like, we got the run game going. The defense is doing what it has to do. My mentality, once I saw that 7 go on the board, it changed. I was like, all right, we're winning this game now. I went from having no chance. I was like, we're winning this game. And honestly, like, as a fan, looking back on it, because like when your team goes on these runs, you watch all like the team yearbook, all like the recaps, all the NFL film special. I always remember being disappointed that was one of their highlights, was that this like fake fluky touchdown. It was just always felt unsatisfying to me that this was part of their run. So I don't look back on that play like fondly.
The Panthers were fond of having a battle of field goals, according to the announcing crew of Stockton, Moose, and Goose. But as a 7-point dog on the road, even though you're stringing together long drives in the second and third quarter here, up 16-12 going into the fourth, how comfortable are you trading field goals against this offense with still a quarter to go in regulation?
I mean, in hindsight, knowing how the game went, I feel good about it now. But like at the time, I was obviously upset. But I feel like Mike Martz made him right by also settling for field goals. Like we'll get to this later in the game, but Mike Martz really could have put his foot on the pedal in this game and won it in regulation, but didn't do it. So I think he kind of bailed out John Fox's conservatism, because they had opportunities like 4th and 1, 4th and 3, where the Panthers are like, send out Casey. And I know Casey made kicks early on, but this game didn't end well for Casey, and the Super Bowl didn't end well for Casey. So it's kind of, in hindsight, it's the wrong move, but obviously it works out. But it does go to show you that there are different ways to win a football game. And I do think this game shows you that the pitfalls of talking about football and how play calling should work in like generalities, and like why, like one thing, like, oh, teams need to run more play action, or teams need to throw more on first down. Like, yeah, for some teams that model works. But if the Panthers had come out in this game and played like, oh, we're going to throw on first down, we're going to run play action, we're going to go for it on fourth, and we're going to do all the things that analytics now tells us to do, I think they get blown out by 30 points. I think the only way they had a chance was playing this coward game of being like, we're going to make this a 30-minute football game where you get 4 drives, we get 4 drives, and if you miss a field goal or you take a sack on first down, you lose, and we win, because you are a much better team. So I think that's what this game is really proof of, is like, there are so many different ways to win a football game, and some of them will be deemed inefficient by, like, people that are smart, that think about the sport now. But I do think that this game was proof that there's still something to playing defense and running the football, even when the other offense is stacked.
Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks. Prize Picks even offers injury insurance, so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. This week on Prize Picks, I'm selecting Giannis Antetokounmpo for more than 32.5 points and LeBron James for more than 8.5 assists. Download the app today and use code BLUEWIRE for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code BLUEWIRE on the Prize Picks app for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks.
Greg is usually a fan of water cooler talk, but it's draft season, and that's all anyone wants to talk about. The Athletic has loads of articles about this year's draft, but Greg doesn't have The Athletic, so now he's filling up his water bottle in the bathroom sink. Which, to remind you, is the sink people use after they use the bathroom. Get The Athletic and get the info you need to speak draft fluently.
Yeah, stacked offense for the Rams that is spending long stretches on the sideline. Part of that, the offense, and part of that, just good defensive play. Julius Peppers and Mike Rucker squaring off against Orlando Pace and Kyle Turley, while also finding and blowing up whatever pass game they're trying to work with Marshall Faulk out of the backfield, blowing up screens, shuffle passes, and but the Rams still do create opportunities, have Torrey Holt behind the defense. I guess you could argue how much of it was an overthrow, how much of it was Holt needing to come away with that tough catch, but they missed a chance for a long walk-in touchdown there. Meanwhile, Steve Smith is starting to heat up. 21 years later, Holt is a Hall of Fame finalist, while Steve Smith was a semifinalist here for the 2024 class. The announcers were saying in 2003 here that Torrey Holt had taken the mantle, I'm guessing from Randy Moss, as the best receiver in the league. What were you thinking about who's the alpha here, squaring off in the 2003 playoffs, Steve Smith and Torrey Holt?
Yeah, like I'm a big Steve Smith truther. I think he's probably my favorite Panther of all time. Like he's definitely the greatest Panther of all time, in my opinion. But I wasn't like fully Steve Smith pilled yet at this point in my fandom. Like I'm talking about 2003. It was after this season though. Like after he caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He caught a near touchdown against the Cowboys in the wild card round. He obviously he has a big game against the Rams here. His first couple of years, he was really just a returner. I don't think people like remember this about his origin story. His first touch in the NFL, which I was watching on the CBS Game Tracker, was a kickoff return against the Vikings. It's the only game they won that year. And then he had 2 punt returns against the Bengals, I think, the year before this. And like he was a Pro Bowl returner. He was like he was trending to become like the Devin Hester of returning. And then this was the year where you finally saw him break out as a receiver. And I think he had like 65 catches, like 900 yards, 6 touchdowns, something around there. And it was like, oh, this guy is something else. And the playoffs is where you really started to see it, especially in this game. And I think like both teams came to the same conclusion is like maybe we were giving the opposite front a little too much credit. It seemed like both teams were deathly afraid of getting sacked and not dropping back to pass. I know Carolina runs the ball either way. But I think both of these teams realized they could pass the ball a little bit, especially downfield. And I think that's when you started to see things open up, especially for the Rams. Once they started throwing those deep in-breakers over the middle of the field, which is what they were known for at this time, Carolina had no answer for it. Like, Carolina was built front to back. Their secondary was not that good. Ricky Manning Jr. has an amazing interception in this game. He had 3 interceptions the next week. He was a good player, but he was never a great player for them. Reggie Howard, I had forgotten he existed, but seeing him watching this game, I was like, oh, I remember Reggie Howard. He was just like, just a guy. He was maybe worse than that. Like in my mind, he was just a guy. And then Deion Grant, who he actually left for the Jaguars the year after that, was a good safety, not a great safety. And Mike Minder was one of the best Panthers of all time, but he was like a guy that wore big shoulder pads and big elbow pads, and he's not a safety that would play in the NFL now. So it kind of made sense to attack them downfield, and we just didn't. The Rams weren't able to do that early on, but later in the game, you could see it happening. You could see those seams in the middle of the defense open up, and I just remember the Torrey Holt drop or the miss, or whatever you want to call it, just being a big sigh of relief. At that moment, I thought they were going to win the game. I was like, they're definitely going to win this game. I've seen them win these games all season long. They're going to win this game, and in my opinion, it was a bad throw. It was a bad throw.
Yeah, that would have been tough for Torrey Holt. And Bulger has another overthrow for an open Torrey Holt that is picked off. And late third, early fourth, he has back-to-back picks. The other one, reminiscent of the 99 Super Bowl against the Titans. They need to play late, deep down the right side of the field to Isaac Bruce, except this time sitting back there like Jim Edmonds for St. Louis in 2003 is Mike Minter for the Panthers interception.
Yeah, that interception, yeah, what he did was he left it inside. Kurt Warner left it short and underthrew it. He left it too far inside, and obviously Mike Minter standing there with one of the easiest interceptions. This interception was totally like erased from my mind. I do not remember it at all. I remember the last one vividly. That was one of the, that play is just burned into my mind. But this one I had no recollection of, and it really did change the game. And it was like watching it was so weird because back then you had those cameras that they were really zoomed in on like the line of scrimmage during pass plays. So he throws it and then it cuts downfield and it's just like a Panther just waiting, like you said, like Jim Edmonds in center field catching a can of corn, and it's like, what happened? And then they show the all-22 replay and you can kind of see what he was going for. They ran like a out and up. And I guess Bulger just assumed Minter would take the bait on like the little post route from the outside guy. It just didn't happen. But yeah, that was another Purdy-ish moment for me. He had a lot of like Purdy-ish moments in this game, good and bad. I'm not trying to shit on Purdy right here. Like he had a lot of like moments where he had a little too much dip on his chip. A lot of like red zone scrambles where I don't think he should have scrambled. Like you have maybe the greatest check down option of all time in the backfield.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the camera is tight on the line of scrimmage and the quarterback, but Bulger, once he releases it, the camera pans over, and it's not an epic Isaac Bruce catch like in the Super Bowl. It's a pop fly to the safety. So Rams turnovers, missed opportunities to take the lead, and in the fourth quarter, Steve Smith starts cooking. Corner post, and Steve Smith just throws the crossover at Jason Sehorn. He eats the turf.
Oh, man. The preview of things to come, huh?
Yeah, foreboding for the Rams. And then the following play, Delhomme throws a screen to Steve Smith over his head, but Smith one-hands it and then shakes the defender, picks up 7.
One of the greatest 8-yard gains you're ever going to see in your life. And that was like his signature play with Delhomme, but this would be like 2005 when he won the Triple Crown receiving, where Delhomme would just throw him the smoke screen whenever the corner was playing off. Like playing 7 yards off. And for Steve Smith, you give him 7 yards of space and he has the ball in the perimeter. It turned into touchdowns more often than you would think. Like it turned into big gains for them. And then this was like a little preview of things to come 2 years later. It's a smoke screen. The corner's playing off. Delhomme throws it horribly. Steve Smith reaches up with one hand, plucks it out of the air, gets his feet back on the ground, and immediately accelerates and makes the cornerback miss and picks up like 8 yards on first down. That's a play that's forgotten in history. In the box score, it's an 8-yard gain. One of the most impressive football plays I've ever seen from a receiver.
Absolutely. And they're in the early 2000s, Allen Iverson vibes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's who he was. He was football's Allen Iverson. I like that call.
Yeah, I saw that one in the YouTube comments, and hopefully Smith gets his statue, too, at the stadium.
No, you would think when they tore down the Jerry Richardson one, they would put up Steve Smith. Like that would be, if I had to put like a Mount Rushmore of Panthers, Steve Smith is first on it, Cam Newton second, and then after that it gets tough. I go Luke Kuechly, and then I probably go Julius Peppers. But like I'm telling you, man, Steve Smith, not enough love for that guy. 2005, I would argue, is he should have won MVP, and I think it's arguably one of the greatest, most impressive seasons for a non-quarterback that we've ever seen. Like one of the most dominant on offense. He carried that team to the NFC Championship. It was amazing to watch.
That Steve Smith sparked touchdown drive capped by a 7-yard run. Fullback Brad Hoover gets into the end zone. 23-12 Panthers, and the camera starts fixating on Kurt Warner on the sideline for the Rams. Bulger had struggled week 17. Despite being on a 7-game winning streak, they lose to the 4-win Lions with a chance to nail down home field advantage. Instead, they get bumped to the 2 seed, play the 3 seed Panthers here. But would you think about going to Kurt Warner in this spot?
I wish I had a better take on Warner's game because I don't really know how good he was, but I would have been thinking about it for sure. Because it's only one game. It's only a 1-game sample, but I wasn't buying what Marc Bulger was selling in the one game that I watched yesterday. I would have liked to see the Hall of Famer go out there, but it's so tough to like change things on the fly. You got the game plan built around Marc Bulger, what he likes to do. I just don't think it would have worked, honestly, especially against that defensive front. Like Kurt Warner, like the one weakness that I seem to remember him having was when he got hit, it was like over. And he wasn't the same player. I know he got rid of the ball quickly, but against that Panthers defense, it might have been a bad matchup for him. So I don't think it would have made much of a difference. But Bulger didn't play all that well. But I will say this about Bulger's game. There were a lot of like ugly plays, and like the interception was horrible. He did make some throws. He made some tight window throws where like I remember Dick Stockton or Daryl Moose Johnson being like, oh, people question him, but like he's showing up. And like I said, there's a lot of Purdy to his game where there's plenty of good to glom onto and like a little bit of bad, and with the supporting cast that gets mitigated. But I think I would have stuck with him.
Martz does stick with Bulger and seems a little spooked. Runs the offense largely through Marshall Faulk, though does have Bulger put it out for him on a corner route on 4th down and 2. They get inside the red zone with like 5 minutes left and then proceed to burn 2.5 minutes handing off to Marshall Faulk to try to punch it over the goal line. But with them bleeding all that clock to cut the lead to 3, 23-20, does that give you a little more relief?
No, I'm a mess at this point. I vividly remember my emotions. I remember everything about the last sequence of plays and them blowing the lead and everything. I thought I was when they scored the first touchdown, I was already emotional when they were lined up for the onside kick. I was like, God, because you have to think about what the Rams were at this time. The Rams were just a juggernaut, like on offense. It was like it's not if they're going to score, it's when they're going to score. Even with Bulger at this time, and like I said, I thought they were the best team in the league this year. It really felt like the Panthers were crumbling and that it was just a matter of time before the Rams would take the lead. But obviously, they had to get an onside kick. I think that was more of a likely proposition back then before the rule changes. And then, like me being like a kid, an onside kick is like, oh yeah, they're going to get the onside kick. Like you're not logical about it. So when they were lined up for the onside kick, I was already a mess. I was already starting to cry. I was like, oh, we lost. It's over. This magical run is over. I was done. And when they got the onside kick, oh, the tears were streaming. I was done. It was worse than Caleb. At least Caleb Williams waited to cry with his parents in the stands after the game. I was crying before the game was tied, and I was crying.
It's got to be brutal because, yeah, the next 20 minutes of game time seems like it's filled with like 40 minutes of real time just kicking team. Starting with this onside kick, one of the most impressive ones you'll see from Jeff Wilkins. The backspin bounces off tight end. He recovers his own onside. And then the Rams have the ball in Panthers territory with 2.5 minutes left. Field goal ties, but touchdown wins the game.
Yeah, but shout out to Mike Martz, man. Thanks for coming through and tucking your tail in between your legs at the right time. Man, they got down to the 15-yard line with about, 50 seconds left, and he's just like, all right, that's enough for me. We got the best offense in the world. They can't stop Marshall Faulk. Let's kick a field goal and go to overtime. I still remember being astounded back then, where I don't think coaching decisions like that were questioned nearly as often as they are now. Obviously, in Twitter, if that happened now, I mean, I think people would be calling for Mike Martz's job then, like after the game, that they sat on the clock, sat on the lead, and just played for overtime rather than going for the win in regulation.
Yeah, Mike Martz had a tendency for being the aggressive mad scientist, and Dick Stockton, once the Rams are in field goal range, says, the Rams are thinking touchdown. They aren't thinking field goal. Believe me. And Mike Martz goes against tendency. Run 4 plays in the final 2.5 minutes and give us the coach field goal reaction double box to an almost comical extent.
You sent me. You DM'd me a screenshot of it, and I responded. I was like, "We need to bring this back." Honestly, it's such a good shot. Was seeing John Fox and Mike Martz watch these doomed field goal attempts in overtime. One of the worst field goal exhibitions I've ever seen in overtime.
Yeah, Wilkins hits the one to get us to overtime, and then he misses one in overtime. Casey misses one in overtime. Casey makes one from 40, but there's a delay of game. So John Fox has his hands up in the air in the double box for not. We have the coaches putting the field goal team out, and then John Fox bringing the field goal team back in. We're putting the offense back out.
On second down, no less. Second down, send out the field goal team. Where it's a 40-yard field goal, and they're sending out. Oh my God, the coaching in this game is just really infuriating.
Has there been a more charmingly shambolic game this deep into the NFL playoffs that you can remember?
I don't think so. This was remember the Chiefs-Bills game from a couple of years ago? Imagine if that game was played poorly. Instead of it being like the greatest shootout of all time. It was like epically bad is the best way to put it. This was not a great game to watch. Like I said, one of the highlights for the Panthers was a fumble forward that was recovered in the end zone for a touchdown. It wasn't like the best highlight. Just watch the one play, and that's all you need to see.
Now take those amazing plays by Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen and replace that with one box by the left upright, one box by the right upright, and a coach in each of those boxes. And Martz and Fox are each nominated for Best Lead Actor, and we find out who wins like every 7 minutes.
And they both lost. And they both lose the award.
Yeah.
Also, barefoot kickers in this one.
Yeah.
The end of an era. Maybe you could see why without overtime and why they started wearing shoes.
Yeah, that may have ended barefoot kicking. I'll need to confirm, but they had another chance, the Rams did, in Panthers territory, maybe another barefoot kick, but Ricky Manning Jr. one-hands it out of Torrey Holt's grasp.
Talk about a sign of things to come, too. The next week he has 3 picks, and I think he had one similar to that almost, where he's like kind of diving in front of the guy. But I just remember being a kid and thinking that was the greatest football defensive play I had ever seen in my life. Looking back 20 years later, it was a good play. It was whatever, but it was a one-handed interception. But against Torrey Holt, I think Ricky Manning Jr. might have been a rookie that year. I think that was his rookie year. I'm pretty sure him and Deshaun Foster were both on UCLA and came in the same year. But what a moment. It felt like the game was over. They were driving. They were doing whatever they wanted. And Bulger tries to, like, I'm going to bring up Purdy again. He tries to improvise. You can see him pointing to Holt before he throws it to break outside. And Holt breaks outside, and Ricky Manning Jr. just makes one of the best plays you're ever going to see. It was like the catch Steve Smith made on the smoke screen. He just one-handed ripped it away from a Hall of Fame receiver. There was no chance the Panthers were losing after that. I was convinced.
Then moments later, Smith, bracketed by Bell and Sehorn again throws the crossover at Sehorn, corner post, catches it, and then Dick Stockton with the call. 3rd down 14 from the 41 of Carolina. Delhomme fires to an open Smith. Steve Smith, and then right before he says it's going to go all the way, you hear sound of shock from Moose Johnston in the booth there. Finally scored a touchdown, this comedy of field goal errors of an overtime, that the game would end on this kind of electric touchdown. Were you in a similar state of shock and excitement as Daryl Johnston there?
Oh, it's more than that, man. At the time, I'm breaking shit in my house. My parents aren't home. My dad and my mom went out to watch the game because, like I said, my dad was a Rams fan. So I'm home alone with my brothers and sisters, and I'm a maniac at that point. I can't believe they won that football game. I still can't believe they won the football game. Watching it back 20 years later, and the way that it ended with Steve Smith, the walk off, it was just perfect for that team. Like, that whole season was. I mean, that's the Super Bowl to me. That game, that play is more memorable than them beating the Eagles the next week and actually making the Super Bowl. Even like the Super Bowl itself, I remember not being too upset when they lost because it just felt like they weren't even supposed to be there. But this was the game. This felt like the Super Bowl. They beat the best team in the NFL in dramatic fashion in the way they had been playing all year. And then it was Steve Smith doing it. It was just a perfect ending to that game and that run for that team. Obviously, it didn't end for the team. They won another game. They lost another game. But it was just a perfect ending for that particular game.
This has been another episode of Remember That Game. Please rate, review, subscribe, and check out more episodes.
Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all understand the importance of mental and physical well-being and proper recovery for top-notch performance. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. In hundreds of locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/bluewire to learn more and find a center near you. That's unifydhealing.com/bluewire. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, including EE System.